Everyone. So in this video, I'm going to give you a quick introduction to the writing process. So before we get started with that, I'm going to stop you and do a quick PFQ minute. So can you recall what are the three processes in the PFQ? Big hint, the writing process is one of them. Time's up. Okay, so the three processes, just a reminder, are the response process, the writing process, and the production process. So how are these processes linked together? Well, if you can remember from the last couple weeks, the response process is about what happens when you read, watch, or listen to a text. So when you're reading a story, watching a video, for example, or a commercial, listening to a podcast or a radio show, and then the students respond, and they respond by exploring the text by themselves and with others, connecting to the text in a personal way, and generalizing beyond the text. So they're really sort of engaging with the ideas and the format of the text itself. So after they've gone and done the response process, we have the writing process. So the writing process does exactly what it sounds like. So it gets the kids to write using ideas from the text, so the response process in their writing. We're going to look at this a little more closely, but here's some of the steps of the writing process. The other thing that we do in the response process is we can take some time to deconstruct a text. And we'll look at that a little bit later when we talk about media and how to read media. But just so you know, part of the response process is to look at the features of a text. So what makes a novel a novel? What makes a magazine cover different from a newspaper article, for example? And this is where you look at things like imaging and colors and font and formatting and look at the ways that those affect the way we read a message. So once you've done the response process by deconstructing the features of the text, we then use both the response process and the writing process and deconstruction in what's called the production process. So the production process, we used text from the writing process. So we read a story and respond by writing our own script, for example. So you use the text in the writing process. You use features from the deconstruction. So you look at what makes a film or a film script. And students create their own media text through the pre-production, production, and post-production. So those are our three processes: the response process, the writing process, and the production process. And that's how they work together. But today we're not focusing on the response process or production process. We're looking chiefly at the writing process. So just to get you started, I want you to pause the video for a second and ask yourself, the last time you wrote a paper for a class, what steps did you do? Did you just sit down in front of your computer and start writing it? You probably did a few things first. So the writing process consists of lots of different steps, but they generally are organized in this way. There's some kind of pre-writing that happens. So you do a little bit of brainstorming, thinking about, what's the point in writing this text? Who are you writing it for? You write out your first draft. There's some kind of revisions. There's editing and rewriting and proofreading, and then you publish. And these steps aren't necessarily linear. They can go back and forth between them. And back to the PFQ. So this is what it says in the PFQ about the writing process. Okay, so the idea as teachers is that we're going to teach students how to use the writing process specifically to make really great texts. So before beginning to write, we brainstorm ideas, then we write a draft, then we revise it, edit it, and publish it. So far, so good, right? Well, here's what I want you to think about. What steps in the writing process do you think are the most important? Is it the preparing to write phase? Is it the draft phase? Is it revising, looking at ideas? Is it editing, or is it the publishing? And the next question I want you to consider: As teachers, what steps do you think students need the most support with? Preparing to write, writing the draft, revising, editing, publishing, all of the above? Well, I'm going to give you an answer which I think might surprise you. Believe it or not, the step that students will need the most support with, and probably the most crucial step because it will determine the quality of their writing for the rest of the project, is the preparing to write stage. Brainstorming and, more importantly, organizing their ideas. So a lot of kids think that writing an essay consists of just that, sitting down in front of a piece of paper or sitting down in front of a computer and just kind of vomiting words and ideas out on paper. And as a reader, this is terrible because you just get a sort of mess. So really, what we're going to focus on is teaching them how to organize their thoughts. Just a reminder, typically when we think about teaching students writing, we focus a lot on the editing, the revising and editing stage. So we focus a lot on teaching them spelling and grammar. Those are important, don't get me wrong. But before we get there, we really need to focus on what's the big picture. So they need a lot of help just organizing their ideas in a really coherent way. So creating a plan and outline is a really important step because it'll determine the quality of their work as it goes forward. Does this text even make sense? So that's where the article by Sundin comes in. He has a big idea, which is using a graphic organizer. Now, when he wrote this article, it was for teachers that worked with learning disabled kids, but honestly, this can apply to all students. His argument is that expressive writing, so like essay writing and academic writing, is actually quite a complex process and it requires scaffolding. So rather than focusing so much on the spelling, grammar, and things like handwriting, which is what teachers know how to do and do pretty well, we also really need to focus on the overall structure and style. So that's the premise, and that's where we lead in from the writing process into how to use graphic organizers to get kids started on the initial step. And it's the end of this video, but I hope you'll stick around and listen to the next one, which is on the article, and I'm going